Hey, welcome back to the channel, and this is the continuing story of the ZXR750 build. In this video, I think we're going to try to get the engine back in the frame, get the swing arm on, and a few other things, so stay tuned. All right, got some more parts painted, so we'll put those in the pile. Heat gun helps dry these things off a little bit. It's not that warm in the shop this morning. All right, I got a package. Some stuff has arrived for the ZX7. Let's see. Well, I know what it is, but you don't know what it is. So this is something I bought from Chris out of the UK, and I bought from Chris before. Great seller, and he's got some pretty cool stuff. So this is a new to me rear hugger. There we go. Very nice shape. Beautiful. No hacking and chopping on this one. Awesome. And there's one more thing in here. It's the airbox silencer. So the only thing I'm missing now, if you happen to know where there's any, is there's little rubber grommets, I guess you'd call them, little rubber boots that attach this to the airbox. So I'm still looking for 2 of those. Let me know in the comments below if you happen to have 2 of these for sale. Just the rubbers is all I'm looking for. Going back to my my go-to rubber care for plastic and whatnot. As I've said before, this stuff does get absorbed by the plastic. And it really transforms it. You just spray it on like that. It's got a bit of an oily kind of consistency to it, and just let it sit. And some of the drier parts of the plastic where the I guess the solvents and the oils come out of the plastic over time, that's the areas that'll suck up this stuff first. Then maybe after an hour or so, you'll see where they appear, and you can just hit it again. And if you want to make it as good as it can be, then basically you just keep spraying it until it stops absorbing this stuff. Then you just take a clean rag and buff the residual stuff off, and it'll look like new. So in a recent video, for me it was only last week, for you about a month ago, I asked for some input on what you'd like to see on the channel, and I got a few good suggestions and lots of replies to that. So thanks very much for everybody that pitched in there with some ideas. And yeah, we'll see what we can do about some of those things as we go forward. I think the overwhelming theme was that from a timing perspective, the 40-minute slot, whether it's 35, 45 in there somewhere, was a good time frame as far as lengths of the video goes. And I think the other general theme was that, you know, people just enjoyed seeing, you know, whichever build happened to be on the books at any one time. There was a few other suggestions on the kinds of details people wanted to see, and we'll see what I can do to accommodate that kind of stuff. The one thing that I can't really get into accommodating too much at this point is kind of the, what bike do you want to see me build next kind of thing. I think if I was actually making money doing this, that would be feasible, but I don't. And when I say I don't, yes, the channel is monetized, but to be honest, because I'm still kind of a young channel, it's still growing, I really don't make much money at all. In fact, I've never taken a single penny at this point out of the YouTube account. So if I'm being completely transparent with you, I probably make about $35 a month net that goes into this account for YouTube, and I've never taken any money out of that yet because it just isn't worth going through the process and getting taxed and dealing with all of the other taxation stuff with Revenue Canada and all that kind of thing that comes along with getting paid by YouTube. So until such time as I grow, if I grow to a particular size where it makes it worthwhile, all of this that goes on here is all self-funded. And so that's really why I have to gear my restoration work to stuff that really excites me and things that I want to add into the collection, and hoping that you guys enjoy that journey as much as I do. So that's kind of the MO for now. If at some point in the future the channel were to get big enough that I can actually start funding the builds with money I make from YouTube, that's a whole different ballgame. Pretty much anything would become potentially feasible. But until then, I kind of have to stay within my own sort of financial means and do what makes financial sense. So the other thing I would say, and I think I've said this before, is what kind of motorcycles I choose not only depends upon what sort of passion I have for a particular bike or what interests me, but it also has to make some level of financial sense. So for instance, there's no point in me spending $2,000 to buy a motorcycle to restore, and then spending $3,000 to do that restoration, having $5,000 invested, and then having a bike in my collection that's only worth $3,000 or $3,500. Doesn't make any sense at all. So part of my fiscal accountability has to be try to buy the right projects and make it such that they're worth, for me in my collection, at least what I've got into them. So I'm just going to fiddle around with the foot pegs. These things mounted up. I'll get them reassembled, I should say. Always takes me a minute to remember how these things go back together. Like that. Just a little bit of copper grease on everything. Never sees, whatever you want to call it. It wasn't meant to go all over the place, but of course did. There's a little clip goes on the bottom here, just to hold the pin in. Done. So I got the swing arm mostly assembled, so it looks fine. Got the rear hugger on there. It's just set on there for now. It's not bolted. It won't get bolted in until later on. But yeah, coming along. Got the chain here ready to go. And so next steps, I think, is going to be putting on the main frame back onto the engine. You will see here that I have the engine adjuster fittings, whatever these calls, like a screw-in bushing that go where the rear engine mounts are. They've all been put back in, and I set them to approximately where they were before, slightly looser, so just so the frame fits on easier. Then these can be torqued down to the appropriate spec once I get the frame onto the engine, and then the bolts, the engine mounting bolts, can go in. Got the brackets on the top. The outrigger brackets are on the underside, and the holder here for the idle adjuster and other things is mounted up there. The little hose adapters on, and I did buy a new kit for the head bearings, but this set of head bearings was perfect. There was no issues with it at all. I don't think it had been that long since they had been changed, to be honest, so I'm just going to leave them as they are. They were all good. And yeah, so that's next. That on there. All right, let's see if we can get this frame back on the engine here. Much better. There. I had a piece of wood in the way that was kind of blocking this from sitting where it should have sat. Slug these adjusters up just a little bit. Right, so that's roughly in the right place. Now I just got to get the bolts, the engine mount bolts put through here. All right, so this probably goes without saying, but before the bolt goes back in, clean the threads with wire brush just to make sure there's no crap and whatnot in the threads. And I always like to put a bit of copper grease or never sees of some sort on these things. So here's another tip for you. You may already know about this, but I find that maybe you do as well. The never see stuff, whether it's the copper stuff or whether it's the silver stuff or whatever, the aluminum based stuff, I guess it is. Over time, the larger containers like this can tend to get pretty stodgy and hard, and kind of difficult to apply. It just becomes a very overly thick paste in the bottom. But this stuff is kind of easily rejuvenated if you give it a few shots of WD-40 and then mix it up with a popsicle stick or something like that, or whatever, and you can actually restore the original consistency of this stuff pretty easily. So use a block of wood to tap this bolt through. So I'm going to wait a little bit with torquing those down until I get some of the other bolts and everything in place. and then I'll go around and do them all at the same time. All right, so here's the other another tip when you're kind of at this stage. It's not a bad idea to go back and reference the photographs that you would have taken at this point when you did the disassembly, just to make sure that you understand where the various wires and cables and whatnot should be routed, which ones go under, which ones go over the frame. In this particular case, I'll be honest, I got lucky because this one I actually had trapped underneath here, but fortunately there was just enough room to squeeze that connector between the engine block and the bottom of the frame. I could get that out okay. But yeah, I'd kind of forgotten to do that, so it's not a bad idea just to make sure you try to pre-position as many of those wires as possible before that frame gets put on, and then you're not going to run into the situation that I almost had where I would have had to kind of, I mean, it was only a couple of bolts, but you know, you don't want to be mucking around any more than you need to be, do you? So I've re-rigged the tie downs for now, so I've moved them up to the frame instead of they were through these engine mount bosses here on the engine. So I've taken those off because I needed to kind of loosely mount these engine mounts on here. And I guess the next thing I'll do is finagle this lower front cradle part of the frame into place. I think before I do that, I'm gonna have to remove that rear strap and then re-rig some tie downs at the back of this frame. So let's get that done. So before I can put these bolts back in that lower cradle, I have to clean all the paint off them, because along with everything else on this bike, they were all painted black. So I'm just putting some aircraft stripper on these things, and a couple of minutes and a wire brush, the paint comes off, and then I'm just gonna clean these up a little bit more so they're cleaner. You still see a little bit dirty there, but yeah, they'll come pretty clean. I don't have a plating kit. I don't replate anything. I really don't have the space to set up for plating, as nice as that would be. So I just kind of do what I can to clean up bolts. If I have to put them on the wire wheel, then I will do that. But these ones I think should just clean up fine with the brass brush. And I just buy these little kits from Home Hardware. You get a steel brush and a brass brush, and they're $1 Canadian. I buy them in a full box for, I don't know what it is, like $10, $12 or something like that. These front engine mounts mounted up to this cradle here. All right, so one of the things that I'm just trying to see if it's a problem or not, or what's going on, is you may recall from an earlier video, when I hit the starter button on this bike, sometimes it would crank and sometimes it would just click. And when I first got the bike, you could push the starter button forever and a day, and it just didn't seem to do anything a lot of the time. So it's gotten better, but I'm trying to just make sure that is it the switch in here, or is it the solenoid? Because sometimes I could hear a click. I push this into a click, but I wouldn't get a full full crank out of it. So looking at the wiring diagram, make sure I'm looking at the right one here. So this is the starter button right here, and the starter button says that there's 2 brown wires, BR it says. If you look at BR down here, it says brown. However, that's not accurate. At least not on, maybe it was brown on the 89, but it isn't brown on the 90. It's actually black and red. And of course that was a bit of a challenge because as you can see here, somebody we know the overzealous person that painted this thing black, got black paint everywhere. So I kind of had to pull this sheathing back a little bit down here just to see where the black and red wires were. So I've got those connected to these jumpers. The jumpers are attached to the tips of the probes there on the multimeter, and I'm just sort of checking for continuity. So and it's kind of iffy. So I'm pushing the button right now, but it depends really how hard I push it. It makes contact like there, but I'm not getting anything. It just says open line. Pushing it now, nothing. Of course, I gotta keep making sure that I haven't lost contact in my little clips here, but so, yeah, see, sometimes it works. Sometimes it doesn't. So I did squirt some contact cleaner in there. I'm going to put a little bit of WD-40 in it just to see if that does anything, but more than likely I'm going to have to open this thing up. I did open up the other one on the 89, and it was a bugger to put it back together. Not impossible, but there's basically on the back side of this little starter button here, there's a little lug. On top of the lug there's a spring, and then that whole thing rides on like a copper contact. And getting this thing reassembled without the spring making its way across the room and getting it back together is a challenge, although not impossible. And it looks, in this case, I'm going to have to take this thing apart, but I'm going to fire a bit of WD-40 in there just to see if that does anything, and if it doesn't, then this is going to have to come apart. All right, it did work quite a bit better with the WD-40, but I figured well, let's just take it apart, because if there's corrosion in there, let's kind of see if we can just clean some of that corrosion off the contact. So if I remember correctly, this is just the bottom half of the case here, and the button is basically here. And so there's a bunch of small screws. There's one down in there, right down in there. There's one there. I think that one has to come off as well. And then there's one there. And then this plastic channel here for the throttle cable, that has to come out. And yeah, we'll get there. I just got to start pulling screws, and it'll refresh my memory when I get there. All right, so I took the screws out, and then there's a little tab down here which you're going to have to pry out from that slot, and then this whole thing is going to come out. But I'm going to put the camera down because if I don't use two hands for this, I'm afraid that there's going to be springs and things that are going to take a trip across the garage here. So let's see if I can get this out without disaster unfolding. It doesn't want to come out. Oh, there we go. bring you back in here so you can see. All right, so down in there, underneath, right there with my finger, is the spring, which is attached to the button, and then back underneath there, if you can see, there's a copper, kind of a copper contact under there. So I'm going to take a closer look at that and see if there's any junk on that. All right, it was actually pretty clean in there, but I did spray some more contact cleaner and some dielectric grease. So it appears to be fairly consistent now. So yeah, we'll call that good. So we're just going to get ready here to try to get this rear swing arm in place. I just wrapped some masking tape around the swing arm just because I don't, if the chain gets moved around, I just don't want it to be scratching up the fresh paint and clear coat on there. It's also worth noting that it's been probably almost a month since I painted this stuff, so the clear coat itself should be fairly durable, but you know, there's no point in inviting a problem when you can just throw a bit of masking tape on there. So I'm going to see if I can get that in. The pivot shaft for the swing arm has been completely cleaned, and there's a thin smear of grease on there. It doesn't need to be a ton, because once you slide it through the hole and through the swing arm itself, you put too much grease on there, it's all just going to get kind of sleeved off anyway. So just put a smear of it on there. Of course, all the bearings in the swing arm have been greased up. They're all good. Did not replace them. They all felt very smooth, so I just left those as they were and just gave them some grease. Okay, I'm going to put the bolt in for the rear shock here. I'm going to put all the bolts in just kind of loosely, and then I'm going to go around and torque everything a bit later. So everything has been torqued down to the specifications that are in the factory shop manual. So that is good to go. So I think next I'm going to put this rear brake brace on, followed by the triple clamps, and then we'll move on to front forks, I guess. So as for the rest of this bike, sorry, I should say as with the rest of this bike, all of the fasteners here are going to have to be cleaned because they're covered in black paint, as you can see. So I'm going to clean these off, or wire wheel some of this corrosion off here, and get the paint off, and then they can go back to installing that brake brace on the bike. All right, so I'm going to put, as I mentioned earlier, I'm going to keep the same bearings on the triple clamps for the headstock. They feel good. Everything feels fine. Everything is smooth. There's no issues. The bearing races in the headstock are all smooth. There's no indentations. There's no track marks in there of any sort. So I'm quite comfortable that these are good. The only thing I will say is that the minor downside is it's difficult to properly repack the lower bearing, because when you pack a bearing properly, you have to force the grease in from the bottom side, the open side, until it comes out of the top. So in this particular case, I can't do that because, you know, the bearing is already mounted on here. So I just have to satisfy myself by doing the method where you just kind of smear some of this stuff, the grease, onto the rollers. So that, you know, ultimately you're putting some amount of faith in the fact that this was packed previously. The top bearing, which fits on the other way around and it's easily removed, that one I did repack, and there's lots of my videos out there where you can see how you repack a bearing, but just kind of to show you quickly how I did it, even though this one's already done. On the bottom side of the bearing, okay, so you can see the taper on the bearing here. It kind of tapers this way. The back side, which is the wider end, there's a space between the inner race and the outer cage holding the rollers. That space is where you want to force the grease into. And when you force the grease in there properly, it will actually start to ooze out of the top. That's when you know it's packed well. And you do that by putting a pile of grease in your hand. This is not a pile, this is just a small amount because I've already done this. And then you take that wide end and you force it in this way against the palm of your hand. And then if it gets in the inside there, you can just kind of take that back out, put it back in the palm of your hand, and then just keep rotating the bearing around until all the grease has been forced in to that gap between that inner race and the outer cage. And then it'll all start to ooze out of the top there. So you can see how it oozes out of the top. That's when you know the bearing is packed. And you need to see that oozing all the way around. Fairly straightforward. I insert it from the bottom, my bearing. Seat the top bearing, the cap here that screws on. Kind of feeling for an appropriate amount of resistance here, making sure it's not too tight or too loose. Next is a little clip on here to stop that loosening off. We've got the top clamp that goes on. The washer and the nut. And as usual, I'm not going to tighten that down completely at this point until I've got the forks in there. It's just easier to tighten that top nut once the forks are in. Yeah, so when I say it's, you know, easier to tighten this nut with the forks in, the reason I don't do it now is because as I start to turn this nut, the top clamp will actually start to move independently of the bottom clamp. And it's just a whole lot easier when you've got the forks in there, just to have it all just kind of locked together, and then that can be torqued properly. So I don't forget that. I always make a note in my book, and I don't check. You know, each page doesn't get checked off until every item on that page has actually been addressed. So that way I don't forget to do something. All right, let's get the side stand back on here. So the way these mount is there's a bolt. So this hole in the frame is threaded. This hole in the frame is not threaded. This one, the bolt goes in from the front. This one, it's a very flat Allen-headed bolt that comes in from the back. And then there's a nut that goes on from this side. So yeah, a little bit different. And I think the main reason that that's done is the proximity of the fastener here to the chain that's right behind it. So they use a flathead Allen just to make sure it doesn't interfere with the chain. All right, side stand is back on. As you probably saw, as I was attaching that, I quickly realized I hadn't painted the bracket there, so I had to deal with that. But anyway, it's back on. All right, let's get this fuel pump assembly back in here. So yeah, next job is the front forks. Get those rebuilt, cleaned up, and refinished, and then they can go back in. And Monday next week, the wheels and tires are going in to be mounted just in time, because by that time, I could actually have, would have been useful actually to have those sooner. But anyway, I didn't want to get them done too soon. I wanted the paint to dry on those wheels before the tires are mounted, less chance of making a mess of them. So yes, we're getting close to getting this thing back on its wheels. And now we move on to the mess that is the front forks. So I'm not really sure at this point what to show you to keep this set of fork rebuilding interesting. I think if you've seen the last 2 or 3 videos on these kind of conventional forks, whether it's on ZX7s or GSXR or whatever, it's pretty much all the same sort of deal. So I'll film as much of this as I can, or as much as I think makes sense, and I'll show you whatever I think is enough to keep you watching, but try not to bore you too much with what goes on there. It should be, fingers crossed, a fairly standard rebuild process for these. I'm just basically going to take them apart, put new fork seals in them, and of course, because they're covered in black paint everywhere, all these things need to be stripped and refinished. And maybe what I'll try to just kind of focus on as well is just any sort of tips and tricks, if there's any to convey. Again, as I go through this process, I'll try to make sure that I mention some of that sort of stuff. What else can I say at this point? Well, not too much. This is, as I've said before, I think usually the job that I find the messiest. I don't think I've done too many fork rebuilds where I haven't made a complete mess of the shop floor with getting fork oil everywhere. It's just one of those jobs I find it's, yeah, creates a big mess. So, all right, so I think we're just about out of time for this video. So that's going to be a wrap for today. And in the next video, I think then we'll get to the front forks, see if we can get those all sorted out. I'll try to figure out ways to keep that mildly interesting. And then I think the other thing that'll happen in that video is getting the wheels back on the bike, potentially rebuilding the carburetors. And of course, on the topic of carburetors, I'm going to try to show you as little as possible, because we've already done it twice on a ZX7, so I don't think you need to see that 3 times. And just generally move this project along a little bit. So thanks for watching. Please like, share, and subscribe if you haven't done so already. And I really do appreciate the time that you take to watch my channel. Time is a very precious commodity, and I appreciate you spending some of yours watching my stuff. So thanks again, and we'll see you in the next one.